So everybody tells you that consulting is the best way to start your career, that you'll be exposed to so much variety, so much new information. But I'm going to talk about the problems here with consulting from the perspective of a junior. Now, specifically, I'm going to be talking about cloud consulting, but it's the same for technical consulting pretty much anywhere. So before we get into the 3 points, let's just quickly cover what is a consultant. So often you'll see maybe like the Steve Jobs meme about how consultants don't do anything or
Oh, how many from consulting? Oh, that's bad. You should do something.
really, consultants are brought in for a specific task. Normally, it's to look at something and how it works, and then how to improve it or how to change it for a better result. For example, a cloud consultant can be brought in to look at the cloud architecture and figure out how to optimize costs or enhance security, or even on-prem architecture and look at how can we move it to the cloud. So they're there for a specific problem, and normally it's kind of almost like a contractor work where you'll be working on a client for a short period of time to find a solution to something. And sometimes implementing the solution, if you're a technical consultant, often it's implementing the solution as well. Whereas with management consultants and stuff, often it can just be advisory. So now that the kind of definitional stuff is out of the way, let's get into the 3 specific problems that I've seen in my career. Number 1 is variety. Yes, as a consultant, you will have a vast variety of tech that you're exposed to. Now, this can be seen as a good thing, obviously, because now suddenly you have a lot of breadth of information, which is really good. But the problem can also be that it gives you a breadth of information and not necessarily a depth of information, which is a problem for a couple of reasons. One is that if you want to pivot out of consulting, it can often be hard because you feel as if you don't have any depth of knowledge in anywhere in particular, and so you can't advance your career on exit because you don't have the knowledge. You can't just become an Azure engineer or an AWS engineer or whatever, because you maybe have been spread across a variety of different things. Now, secondly, it's also because this variety can feel overwhelming to learn, because for 3 months you may be on an AWS project, and for the next 6 it may be Azure, but then it might only be a subset, so it could have been AWS serverless and then Azure migration, and then the next one is an AWS but it's actually not serverless, it's some optimization of something, and then it's suddenly containerization or whatever it is. You get the point, is that it just continually is new stuff all the time, so there's always that learning. And this kind of bleeds on then to point 2, which is imposter syndrome. Now, because there is such a breadth of information, as a junior you have imposter syndrome anyway, right? You come into work, some people think they know it all because they've been to uni, right? But you probably don't. You probably feel more anxiety from the fact that sometimes you'll be working with guys who have been doing roughly your job or something like that for like 15 years. 15 years ago, you were just going to primary school. So like they have so much experience on you, real world experience, and suddenly that can make you feel like an imposter, that you have no right to be there because of the project work or whatever, right? And they know so much more than you, something like that. And the problem with that is that there's this overwhelm that you get, and then with working with new technologies all the time, you just constantly start to get that feeling that you're an imposter all the time. Because like that example I had given, on your first project you feel like an imposter, then you got up to speed and you're like, I kind of know some stuff. Then the next project you feel like an imposter, and you got up to speed and you're like, I kind of know some stuff. And then it's like the next one is a different one, etc, etc. So it becomes this, like, especially for the first couple of years, this never ending cycle of like, you just feel like you don't know anything all the time, which can be a nightmare, right? As you can imagine. The benefit of this kind of imposter syndrome feeling that you have is that if you can leverage it, it means that it will open up blind spots to you on where you can work, what you need to work on. Because if you have imposter syndrome, say something like networking, right? You don't really understand fully DNS or, TLS, something like that. If you're starting to get imposter syndrome feelings when you're in calls talking about that, then at least now you know to go and look that up somewhere else, right? And also realize as well that although people will have like decades of experience, that doesn't make them decades more valuable than you. But additionally, I would say if you can, try and stick to one area. So if opportunities arise for you to become multi-cloud, if you don't feel fully competent in the current cloud or tech stack that you have been consulting in, don't move on to the next one. Just stay on the one you're on and just try, if you can, to get projects that are within that same provider. Because once you master one, it's much easier to go into others. So it's better having expert knowledge in something, or whatever intermediate level knowledge in something, and then bring it across, as opposed to having like this kind of beginnery, intermediate, across stuff. Now, the third problem, which pulls all this together, is projects and learning. So, as you're getting a breadth of knowledge all the time, you will constantly be learning, right? And as I said to you before, it becomes overwhelming. You get imposter syndrome. You feel like there's just so much to learn that you have no idea where to start. Or even if you think you do know where to start, you can't seem to prioritize them. So, the various technologies, you just don't know which technology should I tackle first, right? Which, side note, just pick one. It literally doesn't really matter. Just pick one and just get going. But back to what I'm saying is the project stuff is that often people are like, I'll do personal projects. But I found it pretty difficult at the beginning that my interest was kind of in architecture generally, right? Not in cloud engineering as such, but in the general architecture of systems and how they're put together. So trying to practice this at home, I always found was a bit difficult, a bit weird to like, if you're trying to think of how do I deal with this level of traffic or this amount of, geo stuff, like moving it across the world, how should I architect that, and why would that, and how can I test it? And it becomes like this whole thing of like, well, then you can try and make it and test it, but then it's going to cost loads because suddenly you've created these services, but then you also have to have an app behind it, and then there's another layer. So basically, the main thing I'd say, right, is that don't try to create personal projects that replicate enterprise level architecture and projects. Just think of projects as ways to get to know and get to understand services. Mainly focus on your core services, your virtual machines or EC2s, your storage accounts or S3s, your VNets. Just focus on those and try and find holes in them, and how you can change them and shift them, etc. And flow traffic between things, connect to instances. Just do things that you think you could try and do. Don't try and make enterprise level architecture. Essentially, just practice the basics, right? And don't try to replicate enterprise architecture. Just do some nice simple stuff, host websites, etc., right? Maybe add a load balancer kind of thing if you want, but like don't worry about it too much. More than anything, just get a solid understanding of the fundamentals. So that was the three kind of main concerns I've had being a junior and now mid-level. But if you've had any experiences in consulting or whatever occupation you're in and you can see problems like this, comment your experiences below, man. I'd love to hear about them, chat about them. So anyway, any comments, questions, queries, as always, leave them in the comments below. And until next time, I will see you later. Take care.